And welcome to yet another, what I think is the conversation that is happening in the country at the moment, primarily as it relates to our collective We the People moment to try to create a new civil rights like movement to create the clean New Deal in context to everything that's going on. And boy, a lot is going on. First, I'll say Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join the dialogue. We are literally all over the country, guys. And for those of you watching this, I'm going to introduce everybody from upper left-hand corner from what I'm looking at, and then I guess we'll go clockwise. So Roseanne Rabiola Mile is in the upper left-hand quadrant. She is basically the heart and soul of this movement and has been for some time. She is old school as it gets in terms of we the people to the streets, and we like to call her affectionately the Mighty Mouse of truth. And she definitely relents at nothing to be able to deliver facts and food. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm in the upper right-hand quadrant. My name is, I just said my name. I'm the producer of the television series The Con that you can find at www.thecon.tv. And also, Roseanne and I and several other people from a group called the Real Progressives created a podcast that's called The New Untouchables that has a lot of very important information in it as well. I encourage you to check out both as soon as you can. Right below Roseanne is our good friend from Florida, Paris Dubé. She is a forensic analysis and a former, well, I guess, current. Um, um, I'm kind of getting jammed up on it. Well, I mean, the entirety of. Why don't you? Well, I'll come back to that actual introduction, but she's an expert in all things pathologies of fraudulent documentation that has destroyed millions of people, quite frankly. To her right is a gentleman by the name of Dan Schaefer. He comes to us from Missouri, and we just discovered each other online, and he happened to be working on democratic sort of initiatives across the country for some time, comes at it from a long sort of lens of what should be right in the United States by way of a working and functioning democracy of we the people. And we're very, very fortunate to have his expertise and his quite frankly, his intelligence involved with this group. And we're hoping that by way of people being able to associate, we'll find many more people, hopefully downstream, like Dan, because it's going to take a lot of people to make this happen. Down in the lower center is a gentleman by the name of Kevin Howard, who comes to us from Portland, Oregon, vis-a-vis the Bronx initially, and a whole lot of stuff in between. But Kevin and I found each other online, just like Dan, and Kevin comes from a space of the long lens of understanding from a personal vantage, like myself, the horrific sort of, shall we say, having your life turned upside down and inside out, and all of the other things that go with your life being blown up by systems that are out of your control. Incredible experience working or serving in the military. It comes from a family of immigrants that really cherished the American dream and put his heart and soul into the American dream, into his education, into ongoing master's education, to be in a position to where nothing like what happened to him should have ever happened. But like anybody in this country knows that when systems don't work and function properly, that chaos can happen. And we're all from a generation where we've actually experienced that firsthand. And the whole purpose of this conversation today, primarily, is to start with our understanding of two things that happened that Kevin had shared with us. The first is that there was a documentary, which was more of kind of a promo piece for a book, but it was kind of a long form interview with a gentleman by the name of David Webb. And the book was called The Great Taking, that touchstone on a lot of scenarios that are important to this dialogue. And we're going to start there. And we're going to try to understand and unwrap in context to all of the other things that are going on to try to present a collective interpretation of where we're all coming from in terms of what this particular project in context to what it is that we've been doing and I've been doing on our truth bombs to try to create a kind of a consensus here. And before I move into that, I just kind of want to set the table for a couple of other things that are very important for I would think all of us in the country to kind of wrap our heads around as we're dealing with this. Of course, a few days ago, the state Supreme Court of Colorado ruled that Donald Trump will not be on the primary ballot as a result of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that states very clearly that if you're involved with an insurrection, based on when Congress wrote this following the Civil War, that you cannot hold office or be an officer of the United States, let alone in the highest office in the United States, which that has created a lot of controversy. If you look at Russell Brand, Tucker Carlson, even the great Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, they've all chimed in on this, as well as Cornel West and Robert F. Kennedy, that, oh, wait a second, this could be a problem if there's the courts overreach in not just establishing, but actually fulfilling the laws of the Constitution. That's become a political issue, as opposed to it just being actually executing the law. Anybody who's read the 14th Amendment, Section 3, certainly I don't think could be confused by its intent. That, in addition to other things, of course, we've got chaos in the Middle East. We've got other elements that are happening, as they all are. But from our standpoint, central to everything is this notion of corruption that has complete control, that we're trying to figure out how we connect with the tens of millions of people out there so that we, the people, can be informed with the information that is going to collectively bring us together to give us the power to, in my words, break the grip of that which is destroying us all. So on that note, Kevin, if you wouldn't mind kind of your analysis of The Great Taking by David Webb and what it means to you in context to what it is that we're pursuing.
Patrick, thank you so much for tossing it my way. Yeah, The Great Taking by David Webb. I mean, first and foremost, I want to say that I think he is a tremendous ally to what we're trying to do. And I will say up front that I've actually written to him, telling him about this group and what we're trying to do, and how, in my view, I believe there's a complementary relationship between how he tracked down the fraud that has been perpetrated on the American public and on the globe, quite frankly, and the journey that you went on these last 13 years, Patrick, in the development of the con, and ultimately the new untouchables. And so the complementary from the 10,000 feet level, the con and the new untouchables, the approach you've taken, humanized the national fraud by starting from the ground up, Addie Polk, and what happened to an actual person, which was typical of what happened to me and what happened to you in our lives in terms of how what led to the Great Recession, just destroyed so many lives. So you took a bottom up approach and just kind of tracked through every layer of this onion of deceit, until you wound up at Wall Street, right? And government regulators in the federal government. David Webb, interesting person, family, multi-generational from Cleveland, Ohio. So, Midwesterner and stuff like that, comes from a family of engineers. He just had a fascination with finance and banking and business. And he departed from his family's tradition of engineers, highly educated and stuff like that, to enter into finance. But he had a very analytical mind. And what he maps out in The Great Taken is sort of a top-down approach to how the system, the web of fraud, was developed. And so he tells a story. Over the course of his career, he became a very successful investment banker. And early on in the process, this is coming out of the '60s into the '70s into the '80s and stuff like that. So he was, as the financialization of the global economy, of the national economy was occurring, was building up steam in the '80s and '90s. This is where he had entered into his career after his high quality education. And he just because he's of his analytical engineering type mind, rational mind, much like Dan and stuff like that, saw that there were glitches in one, the way we report financial data and economic data, two, in how the Federal Reserve was participating in markets. Historically, the Federal Reserve was not making markets, was not driving markets, but he discovered starting in the 80s that the Federal Reserve progressively was using manipulation of the money supply to actually drive the business cycle, actually drive the market, and it was doing so in a profound sense. He distilled this in um, an economic data point called the velocity of money. And so the velocity of money speaks to how often does money it change hands within a designated time period, let's say for within a year. And so this had there's a correlation between the velocity of money and economic growth. Okay. And so literally the definition is velocity equals GDP, gross domestic product, divided by the money supply, how much money is out there. And what he had noticed that the Federal Reserve was was significantly increasing the money supply in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that, which was reducing the velocity of money relative. In other words, the money supply was growing faster than GDP. There was more money than stuff being produced. Okay, how about that? And so it was slowing down the velocity of money. And this is the kind of data point that leads to the Great Depression, that leads to massive corrections in the market, right? But this is something that was happening in an extraordinary, ahistorical way. And so this is one of the first glitches he saw. So basically, he goes on to map out how essentially over a 50, almost a 60-year period, powers that be put into place what he calls the Great Taking. And it started, and this is a distilled version, it started with the dematerialization of shares of stock. Shares of stock. Historically, you got paper stocks, and the stocks were personal property. If you bought the stock, you received your stock certificates, you kept them in your safe and stuff like that. That's how securities were. They were physical, and they were personal property, and that's how they were legally treated. Starting in the 60s, this big movement from the top down, Wall Street down, was that we need to digitize. We need to produce electronic records. Instead, it's too unmanageable to handle the paper, which of course was nonsense. But they created this ruse, and they start building up this pressure. And over the next 20 years, the market went from paper securities to these digital securities. Okay, and then by the 90s, so now we have all digital securities. So people no longer have the paper. It's all just digital records and stuff like that. Okay. So in the 90s, then there was this concerted effort starting in 1994 at the state level to change Section 8 of the Uniform Commercial Code, which covers securities, investment securities. And what they did, and so they went to every state legislature around the country very quietly, did not gain any attention, but all 50 state legislatures changed their UCC codes to literally change how we own securities. So historically, as I mentioned before, when we had paper stocks, if you owned a security, it was personal property. And so if your security was held by a brokerage firm, and the brokerage firm goes bankrupt and stuff like that, you would call up whoever is the holding company of the firm in bankruptcy, and you would tell them where to transfer your personal property, where to transfer your stocks, right? Because your stocks are not involved in the bankruptcy of the brokerage firm that holds them. Okay. Well, the change in the Uniform Commercial Code change your ownership relationship with stock from personal property to a term called a security entitlement. And what this meant is now you have an interest in the value of that security that's subject, that in the event of insolvency, not your insolvency, but the insolvency of anyone holding this security on your behalf, right? You have a priority claim that actually is in last place. It falls behind secured creditors, unsecured creditors, subordinated creditors, and then you as the beneficial owner. So we were shifted from being the legal owner having of the securities that we own, that we held, right, to being a beneficial owner who only gets a pro rata, a percentage claim on the value of the security in the event of the insolvency of the brokerage firm or the holding company who holds our security on our behalf. Okay, so that change, those changes occurred from like 1994 to 2004, right? Then in 2005, they made a change to the bankruptcy law, which created something called safe harbor. Okay, so now it's important to see how these steps are connecting. By going from, I'm going to explain safe harbor in a moment, by going from the paper security to the digital security, by changing the UCC code to say that we are no longer, our stocks are no longer personal property, but that we are just beneficial owners and only have a claim, a pro rata claim to the value based on the lowest priority in the event of insolvency. They further changed to say that all stocks are held in pools. So now we're digital stocks held in massive pools, right? Even if contractually you say your stocks are, you have a contract saying your stocks are segregated, they are now legally under the UCC held in these massive pools. Okay, then they go and they change the bankruptcy law to say that to create something called safe harbor. So as I told you, under the new UCC code, you can't tell the bankrupt brokerage firm to just transfer your securities to a different broker, right? What happens in the case of the bankruptcy is that all the creditors ahead of you get a claim on the value of all assets held by that failed firm, right? And this is how you ultimately lose your money. How they guarantee that the top priority goes to the biggest banks in America is they created this provision in the 2005 bankruptcy law, right, which says a safe harbor go to certain, to just the most limited portion of the secured creditors, essentially the biggest banks in America, right, that in the safe harbor, it precludes anyone from interfering with that priority claim from the secured creditors, right? That, including for cases of fraud, negligence, any of the reasons that in on historical bankruptcy law, the trustee would normally be able to claw back, your assets if they were stolen via fraud, right, or negligence, right? The safe harbor provision says for these protected secured creditors, that they cannot, that the transfer to them, their capacity to take the assets, including your shares of stock, cannot be hindered by even fraud, right? So they created this structure: digital shares, pooled shares, no longer personal property, right? Now you're just beneficial owner with a claim and stuff like that. While they were doing this infrastructure to change the legal construct of how we own things, Wall Street then turned around at the same time, concurrently, and start securitizing everything. So I know you're thinking, okay, if I'm buying stocks for the stock market, that's fine. But all debt was being securitized in the 90s and the 2000s. So mortgages, car payments, virtually any type of property that's bought with debt is securitized. It's bundled by the original lending institutions and sold to Wall Street, who then further bundles them, right, and sells to various types of investors. Okay, so because now everything is securitized, essentially, and because that means everything that we actually own or we thought we owned under the UCC code of all 50 states in the United States has reduced our ownership to a claim, but in a context where all these holders are given the authority to use our holdings as collateral for transaction for their borrowings, so that when if they ever default, anyone who holds any of our debts, anyone who holds any of the debts that pay for any of the stuff that we think we own, if those holders default on financing that has nothing to do with you, because they used our assets as collateral, when those people default, JP Morgan Chase and other big banks get to take our assets, get to take all of it, right? And this is the great taking, because everything essentially has been securitized. Okay, so the relevance to the con and to great untouchables is, and to the Clean New Deal is, in order to hold these people to account, we're also going to have to incorporate the repeal, some version of repeal of the changes they made both to the bankruptcy law and to the UCC code, because the treble damages that would be authorized under RICO to hold these people to account for the fraud they have engaged in would not claw back the trillions of dollars that they stole under the safe harbor rules of bankruptcy, under under the change to the UCC code. So we need to we have another layer that we have to unpeel in order to fully hold them accountable. We can convict them of fraud, but it would be actors personally and not the assets that were stolen from the American public. So that's what I'm. So that's the huge relevance of the Great Taking, is it reveals another layer of the systemic fraud, that has been made legal. And the problem is there's a word called harmonization. Not only was this perfected in the United States, but then they harmonized it in Europe. So now you have an internationalization of this process of everything is securitized, and certain financial institutions are the protected creditors who, in the event of the default of any of the financial intermediaries who hold our securities, if those people default and they're allowed to take out debt on our assets without us knowing it, then then all the assets get taken by these secured banks. It's like it's a very small number and stuff like that. And now it's international. So that I will stop there because there's a ton of questions or what have you. But it's an extraordinary discovery. It's relevant to what we're doing. It does not conflict with anything we've learned, but it shows another layer of the deceit and another layer of the task ahead, in order for us to hold people to account for what they did to the American public and for most of the world.
I thought that was an absolutely terrific analysis and well done, Kevin. You certainly grasped all of the prescient points, and unfortunately, you left some of those that a filmmaker would question in terms of the choices that they made, but they weren't. It was more of a promotional piece for the book, and we can touch upon some of that stuff. But I'm going to segue to Paris, because the one thing that Kevin didn't actually comment on, uh, and I know you're going to, be able to pick on it. I'm very curious to see how you responded to Mr. Webb's positioning. But the key consideration, based on everything that Kevin had just laid out, was that it was a bankruptcy court in the Southern District of Manhattan, which I don't even know if it had anything to do with an appellate court or what kind of blanket sort of scenario that enabled nationwide, considering what we know. But of course, it wasn't the Supreme Court. So obviously, these things could be challenged if, in the event, a number of Americans, millions of Americans, came to understand that, in short order, what Kevin is saying and what Mr. Webb has laid out is that it doesn't matter what the underwriting standards are. It doesn't matter if there's criminal fraud involved, that based on what they're proclaiming is that because of the protected privileged class of the primary dealer brokers, that they're untouchable. So, and there's even more to it, because when you find out that the too big to fail banks were on both sides, especially in the 2008 great financial crisis, between creating the warehouse lines of underwriting that enveloped all of the stuff that we show in the con, which are liars loans primarily, which become the liars securities and liars appraisals and liars everything else, of which, of course, a shortcut. Yeah, this is what the civil fraud trial in Trump's Manhattan case last week. A lot of this is covering a small part of it, but ultimately, how does this gel with your understanding, Paris, and where did it take you? And what's your reaction to some information that makes a lot of the other stuff make sense, does it not? But at the same time, it brings up more questions. What are your thoughts?
Hi, Patrick. Kevin, I agree with you. That was a great Patrick. It's a great assessment, but it still misses the point.
We can't hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me?
Better.
Yeah.
So I agree with Kevin as far as the assessment, but I also agree with Patrick. He completely misses the main point of all of this. The main point is the narrative. This is the same narrative that happens in court. Everyone's talking about the securities. Everybody's talking about derivatives and who's protected at the top. And what everybody seems to miss is all those securities, all those mortgage-backed securities, the derivatives, every amount of money that's being made are all based on fraud. If the contract is void ab initio, which means it's paper, everything after is fraud. So they're making money off the fraud they create. And as far as the car analogy that he used, that's identity theft. What our job needs to be, and what my job is in the courts, is one, to keep everybody focused on the crime, the fraud. This is RICO. 2 or more people get together and conspire to commit fraud against other people. And that's exactly what's happening. So the narrative has to change. And so while this gentleman's documentary was very informative to me as a legal professional, to the public, it's just more of the same bullshit rhetoric. It's the same, okay, this is what's protecting the guys, this is what didn't happen to the big guys, but nobody's talking about us. What screamed to me, because I come at this from a different standpoint, is he spent maybe 2 minutes when he said in the beginning, he said, well, I was talking to my friends about it, and all my friends make money and they're probably not really effective, so they don't really understand what I'm uncovering, because it's very important what he's uncovering. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying that his work isn't extremely important and needed. But what I'm saying is, he goes, oh, well, let me go talk to the people. And who does he pick to go after? So to me, because I'm in the fight with my people, he goes after the same target that the criminals go after. He went after a Black man sitting in a rundown house. I don't know if you noticed the imagery, but that's where he went when he was talking about going to the people. And the guy, the guy was just kind of sitting there, and the whole narrative was the poor people know, and the poor people know it's never going to change. And Suits coming to ask questions because you guys figured out we're getting fucked. You guys figured out nobody's going to stop it, but you guys aren't the ones that are helping us. We're down here trying to figure it out. And we're trying to help ourselves. Because you guys won't. Because you keep the narrative in the wrong area. So he goes on to talk about UCC codes changing. I was a bankruptcy.
I've got to ask you if you can stand closer to your computer because you're coming in and out. I apologize.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So he talks about the UCC codes changing for the top. What he doesn't tell you, and what's my job, is to tell you the UCC codes that govern contracts, promissory notes, has not changed. You still need to follow laws. So when you sit down and you make a mortgage, or you make a mortgage contract or a note for a car, it can't just go and be securitized and not have the proper laws taken care of. That's what no one's telling everybody. You guys are all worried about people at the top. Screw the people at the top. We're down here. There's still laws protecting us. They're still taking those laws from us. Our constitutional legal rights are being denied. If you are smart enough, and there's a lot of smart homeowners, if you're smart enough and you argue the UCC code, then you are now a vexatious litigant. You are being held, and if you get deemed a vexatious litigant, you are forever barred in that case to defend yourself. They will do a motion for contempt if you try. I have clients right now that have uncovered this in their case, all truth, that have been shut down. They have to ask for permission. And now I have one case, you can't file anything. How can you defend yourself against criminals if you're not even allowed to speak in court? That's the narrative we need to talk about. We need to talk about the narrative of how we're being denied to defend ourselves against criminals in the court. Not the UCC codes being changed at the top. No, how's that going to happen? The new clean deal, we have to have specific solutions. His solutions at the end are unrealistic. Go to the courts. Well, the courts are corrupt. If we had judges that would be able to, understand this, the judges don't understand. The judges understand they are to do what the criminals at the top told them to do, and that's it. And if you don't do it, you get out. Same thing with the criminals. You have to understand the criminals. We're talking Wall Street, bank CEOs, and all the government people that have helped keep them in power, have taken over our court system. That means you don't get a fair trial. You don't get your rights. So how are they going to help stop it if they're the ones that are perpetuating it? That doesn't even make any sense. So to me, I loved his piece. I thought it was some good information for me. I want to go look up some things that he had said. But it's still the same bullshit and getting nowhere. We're not going to get the courts to do anything.
So did you happen to watch my latest Truth Bomb?
I did.
Okay, so can you, in your own words, then, based on where you're standing after, watching The Great Taking and, making your points, because, just kind of as a segue, I mean, I think anybody who's ever been in a court who, has to have the court assign a public defender to you knows that they're going to try to get you to take a quick plea or some sort of situation where you can't afford, somebody from an expensive law firm that's going to go the distance to get whatever charge they have on you unstuck, right? I mean, we know that there's a difference of methodologies in terms of the level of representation that anyone has in court at any given time. And what you're saying, Paris, is that, yeah, what Kevin is saying and what David Webb says doesn't preempt all of the different laws that are in continuation that do protect the whether it's civil rights violations, so on and so forth. But you've got to be able to prove it, and you got to have a judge listen to it, which means you have to have discovery, which you also said most people don't have. So in context to that, and also in context to what you've been hearing from me in terms of my sort of projection of the clean New Deal, how do you square that circle?
You make all the connections. You've done. I mean, I don't know how to really articulate that. People just need to watch you and listen to the connections because you lay it all out for them, and you don't gloss over like they do in those kind of pieces that gentleman has. I honestly, I can't articulate what I really want. I can't articulate what you want me to say about.
I'm just trying to elicit from you what your natural come from is, given what you've heard me do forever. You've seen the con, you've been in the con, you just heard this. You're in the courts every day and everything else, and we're trying to get the clean New Deal out there. What coagulates in this whole fucking pardon my language, this insane world of, okay, we're going to talk about Trump and the 14th Amendment, Section 3. We're going to talk about the war in Gaza. We're going to talk about very important things that have a lot of people's attention. But where does this fit in context to what you are seeing, what what we're trying to do? And if you can't do it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what are you seeing naturally in terms of the clean New Deal and this information that you're seeing from David Webb?
The clean New Deal has realistic solutions because we know everything that's going on. So that's pretty much. I'll let some other people talk about that. For me, I just want to talk about the real solutions. We need to have the court hearings, just like you had, it's pretty much all of your work is the court hearings. And if anyone knows anything about the Great Depression, that's what stopped it. We have have, what stops them? We just have to get everyone to understand it. And my point is, we can't get people to understand it if the narrative is still talking about the people at the top, and you're not understanding that all of it is fraud. The people out there like David Webb are not talking about the fraudulent vehicles. He talks about the building of the machine that took a couple decades to build, but he doesn't talk about what fuels the machine. He talks about gold, and then he talks about the electronic stuff at the end. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it is. But he doesn't talk about the one thing that will fuel everything, and that's our homes. Our homes are the asset. How do you keep victims in line and shut up? You get something that they're emotionally attached to. You're not emotionally attached to money. You have to use money to live, but it's your homes. And that's what nobody's talking about. That's what we need to change the narrative.
And I buy
Everything
that. I buy that too.
Patrick,
I
can
buy that
please
too. But
respond?
what he did say was that doesn't matter, because he said because of the safe harbor that, all of these other laws are preempted, and that there is no remedy because they have the system. And by the way, well, let me just I'll come back to him. I'm gonna ask I want to ask our next Dan. I want to ask.
I want to finish one thing. They're not preempted. The UCC laws, when it comes to the vehicle, the fraudulent documents, the fraudulent loan, everything you guys are talking about, the securities, the stock, the bonds, the derivatives, all of that means nothing. They're making money off of fraud. None of it's real. So you go after the root of the problem. And you can do that because no one's talking that the UCC laws, those weren't changed. They only changed the ones that help them at the top because they can keep you confused, because most people don't know about derivatives or even how the stock market works. They have no clue.
Patrick,
So as long
can
as they
you
can
please
keep
respond?
derivative in that space, you won't, you'll go, okay, well, they know what they're talking about. They're not talking about the stuff that we can explain. It's fraud. You cannot, it's fraud. Take the
Paris,
criminal.
the thing that you're missing, because it's not true that it's not relevant to the average person. Everything that we own, that we bought with debt, has been securitized.
That's
So
true.
when we change the laws of ownership within the context of securities, we're changing the capacity for us to own anything. So
Okay,
what the average person, so you're talking about a home. The mortgages have been securitized.
so
So
what you're missing is the fraud. If it was not a fraudulent document, then yes, everything you're saying is true.
no, let me,
Transfer is not fraudulent, then yes, everything you're saying is true. What you
I'm
don't
trying to
understand,
say,
I'm fighting this. What you don't understand is if the fraud happens, nothing else matters. It's all fraud.
that
You
is
do
not true. That is not true. Okay, I'm going to read, I can read the UCC to you. What I'm saying here is they changed okay. And this has all been validated by the federal district court in the Southern District of New York in the Lehman bankruptcy on purpose, right? What I'm saying here is that a person's home that was bought with a mortgage that has been securitized, right, is being housed in a massive pool of securities, right? Okay, that the holder of that massive pool of securities is allowed under the UCC code to use those securities as a collateral for additional financing that has nothing to do with you owning your house. And what I'm saying to you is, if in the event that holder, and these holders hold all of our securities, so everything that we own that we had any debt on is being housed
They're the
in the form
primary
of
dealer
security.
brokers who are the
Yes,
recipients of everything I've been
that's
saying.
right.
It's federally record.
And when they go
how is
bankrupt,
securitized?
I'm
You're
trying to
missing
say,
how it's securitized.
Paris, listen.
I I'm in the court fighting this. I know exactly what I'm talking
Okay,
about.
then let me respond to you. Let me respond to you. I'm just saying. I didn't interrupt you. I'm trying to respond to you. Right. The missing piece that you're saying because the context prior to it being securitized was fraudulent, and therefore you can claw back. No, they're saying expressly pre-bankruptcy. It doesn't matter what happened before the bankruptcy. It doesn't matter why the broker dealer went bust. And again, they're designed to go bust on purpose because they're allowed to take on excessive debt. They're allowed to use collateral that's not even theirs, that they're just holding as
You know what
collateral
that's
for
called?
future. Yeah,
You know
no,
what
but
that's called?
it's been
Identity.
made. Yeah, I know, but it's been made legal. They are in the UCC code. They are allowed to use the securities that they hold as collateral for their own trades and their own financing. This is expressed. This is why they tend to there's a higher risk of default, that the holder can go in default. So in the case of Lehman Brothers,
Yeah.
when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and they went bankrupt because they were holding all these toxic assets. Okay, but beyond the toxic assets that made them go bankrupt, they had customers with billions of dollars of securities, of property, of cash in Lehman Brothers, that Lehman Brothers was authorized to hold as the broker dealer. When Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, those holders, those clients, went back to get their money, and they couldn't because JP Morgan Chase was the broker dealer and the secured creditor on financing that Lehman Brothers had taken out on those customers' assets that they were holding. And so therefore JP Morgan Chase got to clear these people's accounts. It was the sophisticated investors who put millions of dollars in an investment bank who lost their money in the bankruptcy, right? It went to JP Morgan Chase. And that is what the bankruptcy law of 2005 did. Drill down to your customers. They own nothing and they're going to like it. Okay, this is what David is saying. They changed the laws to where we think we own things. We're paying back debts on things we think we own. But in the event that the people holding the paper go bankrupt and they're being set up to go bankrupt, right? Some secured lender who's lending money that they know is going to go bust, right? Right? Will be able to take everything. Oh, I mean,
All right,
because they own it.
let me insert this real quick because I want to move this to Dan and I'm going to circle back to everybody. But there's a reason I wanted to set this up the way that I have, because we're going to address all of these things that do elicit tons of questions, and they're resolved, quite frankly, by this effort. Okay, so Dan, based on your recent article and what you're hearing with the group and what you saw in the you know in the this David Webb project, right? This book, The Great Taking. Look, what you've heard from us this whole time is I continue to elevate the notion that it was the Federal Reserve, after 98 meetings behind closed doors, well, at the time in 2008, the media and Congress and the incoming presidency and all of the hoopla surrounding the 2008 election, everything focused on what we called the Troubled Assets Relief Program, which was $750 billion. And then what followed from that was what we called HAMP, to make it another $50 billion available to so-called modify the mortgage rates, right? These were these emergency government scenarios that were supposed to create liquidity, and the way they were sold to us through a media that had no idea what the hell was going on. They were, and the reason why I had to go make the con was that they were, premised that it was the $750 billion that was going to save the global economy. But what we wound up finding out was, no, that wasn't even a scratch and dent. I mean, that wasn't even the first inch of what we're talking about. What we discovered through all of the litany of the information that we lay out in the con, of course, which was an incredible pipeline of grift every step of the way, but we show you the details, unlike everybody who says it was grift, who doesn't understand what the grift was, whether or not they're podcasters or mainstream media or people reflecting on it. No, we show you exactly what they did, how and why, what the process was, all the way through the pipeline to create the situation that got us to, oh yeah, lo and behold, the Federal Reserve provided in 2009 through 11, $33 trillion in emergency lending apparatus. In addition, there was another $16 trillion. So let's do the math on that. That's 49 trillion, roughly 50 trillion, right? $50 trillion to do what at that time our secretary, well, he became, yeah, well, he was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was the former head of the New York Federal Reserve, a guy by the name of Timothy Geithner, said that the American people are going to be foam on the runway for the crashing financial system. And then, of course, Hank Paulson kept alluding to the investing public throughout the world. Don't worry about it. We've got the bazooka. We don't need to use the bazooka. We've got the bazooka. But what he was referring to, and all of this misinformation and everything else, was no, they used the bazooka. That was the 33 trillion to paper over, according to David Webb, an $800 trillion derivatives scam. Okay? Because it was roulette on roulette on roulette, and you couldn't do any of this stuff. According to David Webb, he says the collateralized debt obligations based on the hedge funds that were also the LLCs within the same banks that were on both sides of the bank was the guarantee that that's how they were going to, from origination to securitization to derivatives, that got us to this place to where nobody understands that the Fed, and this is what David Webb also goes into, and I'll save the big catchphrase for later, but that this financial system has complete ownership and control of not just the government, but the media, the courts, everything upwards, downwards on a global basis, has absolute control to basically pull off what Paris and Kevin were just somewhat discussing, debating, seeing it from a different space, that is all predicated on a facade of fraud. And what is fraud? Again, like Hillary Clinton said back in 2016, fraud is shenanigans. That's the way she and Obama described fraud. What we know is fraud is illegal theft by deception that has different degrees of, felonies. And in the case of RICO, is the death penalty. If you're a financial organization, you're dead. There's clawback, there's all these other things. But what Kevin is introducing is, oh, wait a second, they were able to throw that out when nobody's looking through the UCC code, and then of course, safe harbor. What's your takeaway so far, listening to this conversation, knowing what you know, and then transition it from where you're sitting to what the threat assessment is and what has to be done with the Clean New Deal?
I'm still trying to catch up with you guys and try to figure out, what's going on. But what I do see, like from the 30,000-foot view, is I see that I see what Kevin is saying when he talks about David Webb's book, and also I listen to what Paris is saying, and it seems like they're kind of like different aspects of the same problem. It's all fraud at its very core. But still, like I say, I'm trying to catch up with this. The thing that I feel vulnerable about, and I've done a little bit of research over for the last 24 hours regarding the UCC codes and try to figure out, how does that exactly work? Because, the very opening sentence in David's book, in chapter 1, it says, this book is about the taking of collateral, all of it. The end game of this globally synchronous debt accumulation supercycle. So, I get skeptical when I see stuff like that, because I think, what's the end game? Why would somebody want to own everything? Because to me, it's like you got a goose that lays a golden egg. If you kill the goose because you want that last golden egg, it's not going to lay any more golden eggs for you. I talked about this before, Patrick, about this movie, James Bond movie some time ago, where the Russians actually helped the Americans save Silicon Valley, and the reason is because, not that they're patriotic or anything like that, but the practical interest in all companies, in all countries, as well as all people, is to keep the economic cycle going. And if you take things away from people, if you take away everything they have, they'll fight you. As I told my son when he's growing up, told him numerous times, is don't ever fight someone that has nothing to lose, because if they have nothing to lose, they'll go all in, and so that's why I get a little skeptical when I read. I am reading David Webb's book at this point, and I'm also corresponding with looking at different aspects of the UCC codes. I don't see specifically where the UCC code says things like, if you buy a car from a car dealership, the car dealership, if they've used that car as inventory, as collateral for a loan, that if they default on that loan or if they go bankrupt, that they can still claim your car. I didn't see that. What I did see was that the way the UCC codes work, from what I understand from this, again, I'm just getting into this from the outside over the last 24 hours, is that the car dealership can claim ownership, or can claim a cars on their lot as collateral, but when it's sold to somebody, that collateral is rotated out. The person, unless the person buys it under fraudulent means, or if the person buys it with the understanding that that car is being used as collateral, if the person just comes in off the street, buys the car outright, the car dealership has to remove that car from its collateral list. But then when they get a new car in from the manufacturer, they can then put that car back onto the collateral list. So I don't see that. I still have to read this more. I'm just trying to figure out how this works. But again, yeah, that's why I'm skeptical.
Say something? Can
Sure.
I say something? Yeah, that's an example, an analogy. He wasn't being literal. To try to give us a real world example where the collateral is going to be held is not, at the car dealership and stuff like that. It's the broker dealers. In other words, all the loans for to acquire whatever the assets that we say we own and we're paying on are securitized and held in the form of securities. And then those broker dealers and those custodians are allowed to use that collateral, whether it's a security or it's cash. They can use that collateral, those assets as collateral for financing that they do with these secured creditors like JP Morgan Chase. And in the event that they over leverage, because you didn't sign up for this risk, they default, JP Morgan Chase gets to come in because they changed your ownership relationship with those assets down to just a claim that is the bottom rung, the lowest creditor. And that's the problem.
Yeah, and I've actually looked at that as well, and I'm trying to research that, just going to different websites and
Hey, Dan,
even
can I
going to
offer
AI and
something?
asking about it. Yeah.
Can I offer something in between that might be helpful that I hope you can respond to within this context. So let me draw a couple of more sort of and coagulate the situation from what Paris and I have been on the front lines on for some time. So Paris is somebody who is a paralegal forensic auditor of how home ownership through the wet ink note, which is required for any type of foreclosure to prove who is owed the debt. And that's the way we've always understood the law, even within UCC 9, which, he talks about UCC 8, but UCC 9 is, these things could be sold, resold, whatever. But with the housing situation in 2008, a few things that I want you guys to keep in mind. First and foremost, there was a point that I wanted to make that was really important in terms of the domino here. Damn it.
You danced around it too long. You waited too long and it went away.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But let me just talk about the collateral, and let me talk about the collateral versus, because first of all, we're talking about insolvency, right? So like if your collateral has got to be worth a certain level of what the appraisal is for you to be able to be on the end of whatever type of lending structure. That's true of banks as well. Okay. That's first and foremost. So what we had in the 2008 great financial crisis is all of these liar's loans in all of these different neighborhoods that had hyper appraised values ultimately should have been written down to practically nothing. Okay. They weren't. They were top dollar. They were 100 cents on the dollar because of all of these different things with AIG and Goldman Sachs and everything else. But if we find out through the Federal Reserve, they were paying 100% on the collateral through this Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that they used illegally because all of the institutions were insolvent. All of the collateral was insolvent. They didn't write it down. They paid top dollar, which is equating the 33 trillion plus the 16 trillion, which is the 49 trillion. But to bankrupted, this is interesting about the UCC 8, because all of the primary dealer brokers, the too big to fail institutions, had bankrupted themselves, and the collateral was worth nothing. That's where there was always this constant sort of discussion about, okay, there were subprime, which were now worth nothing, that all of the securities were dependent upon, but that's how they had to create liquidity to get back into the global financial system, because we all know it's liquidity that continues to, continue the process of the securitization and everything else. So to kind of finalize the sequence of the collateral and UCC code. And there was this one huge point that is really critical to understanding all of it. The GSEs ended up morphing all of the global tranches, the securities. They're the ones who purchased everything in this yard sale when the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie and Ginnie, basically had to go into conservatorship. Okay, so they went bankrupted too. And so the government came in with, these guys, you know how you facilitate through a bankruptcy, you're going to have the trust attorneys like with Enron. In fact, as it turns out, John Ray, the guy that was involved just recently with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, he oversaw the bankruptcy stuff with Enron. As it turns out, I just learned today, he was also in the midst of all of the things with Fannie, which is interesting because it would be the kind of the same correlation. I think you guys have heard me say in the past that BlackRock's what's his name, Larry Fink, didn't make his grand entrance to Wall Street based on Aladdin, of what a lot of the press talks about. He made his grand entrance in 1986 through the Resolution Trust that did the same thing we're talking about, but with the savings and loan crisis. So what we're seeing is a repetition by a government that has this plan with all the same players that get to clean up the mess through this like opaque monstrosity that Kevin and David Webb bring to our attention through UCC8 and everything else. But what ultimately you have to try to suss out from where you're sitting as it relates to the Clean New Deal, isn't it just telling you straightforward that the whole thing is a fraud to maintain the complete control of the economy by the primary dealer brokers and their investors, which are sovereign wealth funds, which are the top 0.001% that are the largest corporations in the world that have complete ownership of what we all think we're buying into? That's kind of a fair market value of everything else. I guess that's the point that I want to hear you kind of rap about, considering someone coming from the outside in looking forward to a Clean New Deal.
Well, one of the things that I hesitate to believe is that there is any one single person or brain trust behind this whole thing. I kind of feel like everybody's kind of grabbing the tiger by the tail and taking it for a ride, and nobody really has their head around the whole thing. Some people are just finding their angle. They're finding the fraud angle, and they're using that. But I guess to me, it's maybe it's just because it's too complicated for me to understand. But it's hard for me to comprehend the idea that any one person or any one small cabal of people really understand what's going on, and that we're just sort of plowing forward in this uncontrolled fashion. We're going to trip and we're going to fall. Maybe some people end up with all the toys at the end of the day, and we have this big reset of the economy. But that's it. I guess I'm still skeptical about it. But what I do see is the article I wrote the other day, which I don't understand derivatives that much, honestly, but I do understand the word risk, and I do understand that that's associated with the word derivatives. And when I see things like the capitalization of banks, financial institutions, they want to capitalize more in put more money on derivatives, and they're not. They're fighting Congress, where Congress says we want you to have more capital on hand in case something falls apart. They're saying no. Now, to me, I still have to be convinced that is actually being done on purpose by some controlling brain trust. I think it's just being done on purpose by people who see nothing but dollar signs in front of their eyes. They see money. They say, why should this money sit over in this account right here for insurance when I can spend it and make more money over here? That's what business does. I mean, they don't really care, right? And it's up to Congress to make them care. It's up to Congress to crack the whip. But they found out, well, we can just pay off Congress and have them turn their backs and wink, wink, nod, nod, and do whatever they want with the money. And so the whole thing just continues to just wobble down the road, and it's going to fall off the road. And to Paris's point, a lot of people are taking advantage of this, and they're committing fraud because they're able to get away with it. Not because it's any sort of brain trust behind it, it's just because they can get away with it, and they're going to get away with it. They can buy off the judges, they're going to get away with it. They can buy off the politicians, they're going to get away with it. But I just don't see the big picture as some sort of coordinated event. I just think it actually is going to require individuals going into politics, being politicians, holding the line and stopping this thing in its tracks. And it's not going to take, it's going to take a while to unwind this whole thing and put a stop to it. It's not going to come to a stop overnight. There is no one single person that you can get to that's going to say, okay, you caught me, I'm going to stop doing it now. It's going to take decades to get this thing under control. But the good thing is that Paris and Kevin and David Webb and Roseanne and of course you, Patrick, are all aware of the problem and all aware of what we need to do to fix this problem. That's the important thing. And it's just a matter of getting everybody else to believe it as well. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Well, that's cool. So then characterize that, if you don't mind, in terms of now, in terms of the stuff that you're seeing in the ramp up to the 2024 election, and contrast that with what why you're involved with us towards marching towards a clean new deal and how that might impact the presidential election in the population writ large.
Well, I think that you get people like, I mean, I'll put Obama in the same boat as Trump in many regards, in the sense that they've all employed people in their cabinet that are part of this whole thing. That their incentive is not for the American people. Their incentive is to keep their buddies afloat. And no matter what happens to the economy, they're going to keep their buddies afloat and keep them going. And I have no doubt Biden's in on it as well. I mean, I haven't looked at him that closely, and historically just been looking at Trump and Obama. But I think it's just going to take this is what the Clean New Deal is all about. It's going to take A, educating people, B, putting people voting for people in positions of power that are immune, or hopefully somewhat immune, to the to any sort of political blackmail or extortion. It's going to be hard to do in light of the 2010 Citizens United decision and many decisions before that, going back over 100 years. But we have to begin to unwind this thing. We have to begin. This is a tiger. I believe it's a tiger, and everybody's just grabbing it by the tail and running with it. We have to stop that tiger, and the only way to do it is to get people in positions of power that can crack the whip and hold these people's feet to the fire. And it's not just the people either. I think it's also the laws that have to be changed. The UCC codes, like I said, I'm not that familiar with it, but if it has these problems that are in it, they need to be changed. And that's a state by state fight. That's not a national fight. And so, I'm personally working with a representative who's running, a person who's running for the 8th district in Missouri to be the representative to replace Jason Smith, who's currently Jason Smith is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. I think he's either aware of the situation and not doing anything about it, or he's completely aloof to the whole situation, completely unaware of it. Either way, the guy's not helping out at all. And the person I'm helping to get elected is aware of these issues, and I will make sure he's aware of these issues. And I think this is what it's going to take. 50, 100, maybe 1,000 people as part of this movement to start working with the representatives and start calling them and saying, this is what we have to do. This is, you need to serve the people, not the money, not the politics, not God, just serve the people, and everything else will sort itself out. But we got to get back to the basics. We got to get back to serving the people. And Paris, you're in the middle of it. I mean, this is a nasty, nasty war that you're in the middle of. And my hat's off to you that you're fighting it out. You're one of the soldiers in the trenches there that are really helping out the situation. But I feel we need to get ahead of that so that you're not so busy trying to fight off, crooked judges and politicians and so on. We need to fix the system.
Roseanne, you have been with me, from the very beginning that we, launched the con, and then, of course, all things New Untouchables. And you were able to maneuver out of a place you were in where you were all in on what we called modern monetary theory. That's how we met. But you were able to transition to the Clean New Deal. What are your kind of collective thoughts on this conversation as it has been evolving in some of the points that we've all made?
Thank you, Patrick, and Kevin, and Paris, and Dan. I am so glad I'm 74 years old and look in the mirror and see 25. Because I've learned from the time I was a lot younger than 25. What people will or won't do. I never lost a house. I never thought about stocks, derivatives. They didn't even have derivatives when I was, coming up. I never thought about an American dream. What I saw, what I continually fought against, around, under, in between, up, down, any which way, was corruption. And it was the Chicago model. Gee, where did Barack Obama come from? Okay. You train people in Springfield and then you bring them up to Chicago. That's how it works. Anyway, all the things that everybody's saying, we have to think of the large picture. And the large picture is, we can talk about Mr. Webb's book, what he thinks is going to happen. We can talk about this code, that code, this law, whatever. We can talk about electing people locally, but unless and until we make a concerted daily effort to talk about, here's the corruption. You know, that fish that rots from the head, here's the corruption. It's not rocket science. It is racketeering. It is that simple. One of the folks in the only RICO conviction that was ever obtained in this country knew nothing about finances, nothing about derivatives, nothing about UCC, no laws, no nothing, bankruptcy. It's theft. He knew theft. He knew crime. Simple, 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 straight to the point. Straight to the point. We have no one giving us, straight to the point, here's what happened, here's the evidence, here are the folks who saw that corruption take place. And what did they do? They showed their integrity and courage, and they didn't care about what they would lose, and they've all lost. And every single one of them I've heard say they do it again. Unless you are willing, unless your agenda is to give it all up, you're not going to go to the streets. You're not going to listen to truth bombs. You're not going to watch the How do we spark that for a clean New Deal? Not just a New Deal. And I will tell you very honestly, I was never an FDR. You know how they prayed to him and they got his picture and Kennedy's picture. No, 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 no. We have always had corruption. But there have been times when we had people of integrity and courage who put it on the frickin' line. You put it on the frickin' line, you had death and destruction and civil war. And then what do you get? You get the corruption coming back. Okay, I mean, we can even go back. We got the revolution. What happens? It's wonderful. We have great stuff. We have the Constitution. What happens? The corruption comes in. If people cannot tie the corruption, which must be purged in all sorts of ways, locally, county, everything. But that's one thing. You gotta get them to want to go to the street and give up their life and tell people the truth exists. The truth exists. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We got plunder on steroids. We got the Emperor's New Clothes. You're watching the Emperor's New Clothes on really bad acid. You gotta watch. You gotta talk to the guy, because he'll talk to you. Patrick will talk to you all the time. You gotta go to the guy who put the stuff together. Now, people loved FDR, okay? How come I didn't love FDR? Did he do some good things? Yeah. I can appreciate and love him, give him a pat on the back for implementing in the first 100 days of his administration what Ferdinand Pecora started. But why do they listen to Ferdinand Pecora? Why? Patrick, why did they listen to Ferdinand? He had real media. He had real media. Do we have real media today? No. What do we got? We got a couple of, we got the Con. We got a Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. We got the new Untouchables. We couldn't even get people who were, oh yeah, this is how it works. Here's MMT, here's how it works. Yeah. The economy works in the framework that MMT talks about. But you can have MMT for good. You can have MMT for evil. What do we got now? We have got plunder that has become glorified by the legal system. Where the hell are we going to get with the legal system? Unless and until we get the people. If the people don't come up, and go crazy fomenting, tell those politicians, no. If the people don't do it, and they're not sparked by the truth, if they can't handle the truth, what do you got? Frickin' fossil fuels destroying the world. It ain't me driving my car 10 miles, okay? Who's involved in fossil fuel? The big boys. I call them the big boys all the time. They're connected. Is it a grand conspiracy? Do they have meetings every 3 weeks? Well, maybe when they go to Davos, I don't know. You know, when they all go to lunch together over here, over there. They know what the hell's going on. Okay, but as long as they can control their sphere, They got it made. They got it made. If we're not if our agenda is not to have a thriving planet and thriving people, and Americans kind of gotta be those people, okay? How do we take the lead? We don't take the lead with frickin' military bases. We take the lead with courage and integrity. We take the lead. We make plunder as obsolete as it can possibly be. We can look at all the details. We can look at all the stuff, but we don't have somebody giving us the truth in media, except this guy over here. Wait, I'll pull it this way. Okay. We don't have, who's showing? Okay. We gotta be promoters. You know, Patrick and I talk a lot, and we went through a time of talking a lot of biblical references. I know a lot about the Bible only because I taught myself how to read from the books of the Bible that my mother bought me, that they were illustrated by the Marino nuns and priests. And I like the pictures and I like the stories. Moses didn't get to the promised land, but he saw it. I don't know if I'm going to get to the promised land, but you know what? I know the promised land, as good as we can possibly have it on this planet, is possible. I've seen it. I see it in places all the time. I see it in people realizing that my smile, what I said to them, made them feel like a human being, a mensch, okay? We can do it because I see it every day, and I see the bad shit all the time, and 5 times on Sunday. It's there. It's possible. But we have to promote. And I don't know the magic words. I don't know that there's magic words, magic wand. I only know that for me, truth is magic. When the con came to me, when I spent the last 3 years, I have never been more certain, more sure of what I have to share in any and every situation that I encounter, because it's all connected. We're all human beings. What are we, giraffes? We're all human beings. We all bleed the same way. Look at the big picture. We're all connected. Get the truth out there. Do it. Don't, okay, I'm going to say this. Don't sweat the small stuff. And that's not to minimize contributions from this author, that minimize. It's not to minimize that at all. It all connects. Connect, and don't sweat the small stuff. Connect it, promote. That's all.
Well, I'm going to kind of conclude this because we've been on for a while, but I thought that was beautiful, Roseanne, and thank you for that. And really, Dan and Paris and Kevin, I'll just kind of segue out of this with where I always begin. I mean, look, when I tell people that we have the $70 trillion truth, I'm not kidding. when you see Russell Brand and Tucker Carlson and Vivek Ramaswamy and Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald and others that are in this capacity where every day is a reaction to something else, and it takes you further and further away through this political calculus and this zoo. Again, like Roseanne said, all of these things are important, but the centrifugal force of power in this country is money. And what I'm telling you is how the money operates. And what David Webb did for us in this particular case is he aligned, he validated, and he continued and perpetuated certain elements that we don't talk about all that distinctly, although when you fully understand the grand composite, there's a lot of things that are very close, like UCC code, and then ultimately when you get into the safe harbor, because of what the safe harbor means in terms of David Webb's work, that the guys that are holding this are the primary dealer brokers. Who are the primary dealer brokers? They're the too big to fail institutions. They're our financial system. What is our financial system? Well, our financial system is supposedly that the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, and a government of, by, and for the people, is supposed to be accountable to Congress. And through a litany of things that we've shown you in our work and what we've done in the New Untouchables primarily, is we showed you that who was the guru in 2.5 decades of being our Federal Reserve chairman, a guy by the name of Alan Greenspan, was mandated by Congress to regulate the housing market. And we have the information of how he was given all of the information that reveals that he could have easily, in a nanosecond, policed it and prevented everything that happening that blew up the global economy, but he chose not to. Why did he choose not to? Well, because maybe he revolved out of his position, and there was some sort of inside, sort of agreement to where he wound up with a large hedge fund to kind of, go off into the career and disappear, while his wife, Andrea Mitchell, is some sort of like, I don't know, we're supposed to respect her as somebody on media, which again kind of shows this composite. But Alan Greenspan told everybody that nobody saw it coming. Well, but he not only saw it coming, he had all the details. And it was incumbent upon him as this Federal Reserve chairman to make sure, as a cop, we all know any cops, right? If an old lady on the block gets her purse stolen, the cop is there to hopefully, apprehend the criminal. That's not what happened. The criminals were working with Alan Greenspan to not just rip off the old lady that I just referenced, but the entire city, country, world, and yada, 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 in ways that are beyond comprehension. I mean, we're talking, again, what David Webb shows us is that the GDP of the world is tiny in comparison to the derivatives that all of this stuff feeds, that these guys have both sides of the trades. And by the way, what we show you in the con too is that law firms have both sides, like these white shoe law firms. And by the way, I'll bring it to the final point, which is kind of funny to Dan's point, because my partner Eric and I used to debate this all the time. We used to use our 80s kind of reference, right? We were like, is this whole thing manipulated by Ming the Merciless, or is it a culture? And of course, we're like, yeah, it's a fucking culture. There's no way in hell and what we learned from Bill Black, our master mentor, that everybody sees what everybody else is doing, and everybody can see how they're making money, and then it becomes a thing. That's how we ended up with control fraud. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, oh, that guy's doing this. Oh, I can do that. Oh, we can do this. And then, like I think Dan said, if nobody's going to stop us, then you keep going, right? So ultimately, we reveal to you and everyone else who did what, when, and how they did it, what the consequences were, and now are. And nothing has changed over the course of the last 2 decades, at least. Nobody's challenging this system. And it's this system that, whether or not they have complete control or just a very heavy outside influence, I don't know if it really matters, the degree. They just have enough influence to make sure that nothing changes. And so here we are in yet another presidential campaign, looking for allies, looking for people that are smart, that can break through. We just simply want people that wouldn't let that old lady's purse get stolen without actually doing something to prevent it. It's really that simple. but unfortunately on a monumental scale. And everybody around us is lying. And I'll finish this with this one last piece. Ironically, to the Ming the Merciless point. So what David Webb says is, oh yeah, it was Ming the Merciless. He puts it on the CIA. Now, interestingly enough, and if we wanted to discuss that another time, I mean, the global stuff and what the CIA has been involved with forever, when you think about all of the bad actors around the world that we saw with the Fenton files and revelations that there was 2 million suspicious activity reports that aren't revealed. We know that Chase was working with Epstein, all sorts of really strange stuff, bad actors, terrorists, yada, 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 extracting billions and trillions of dollars of wealth from around the world and funneling it into our financial system. Oh yeah, by the way, Deutsche Bank, Putin, Trump, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But the apparatus that was there to make sure after the Federal Reserve met 98 times to be able to suss out, we're not going to just do $750 billion to do TARP, which is what the media and everybody told us and blah, blah, blah. When I just told you that it was actually 33 trillion plus 16 trillion, which was 49 trillion. And that was up to 2014. There's been another 30 trillion since to this apparatus. And the guys that were actually the ones that were in the point position to manifest it and put it all together wasn't the CIA. It was Sullivan and Cromwell, which created the CIA. So however you want to interpret that, if you want to interpret that as like the boogeyman and everything else, and everybody's blaming BlackRock and all these players, yeah, they're all in and it's all part of it, and it's real. It's not. We've got the facts. That we could talk about that all day. So we'll finish with this, guys. It's been a great conversation. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, onwards and upwards to the Clean New Deal. And I hope that this message gets to somebody and that we can grow the circle for people who want to fight for liberty and justice for all. Thank you, guys. All the best. I'll say end and I'll say adios. Take care, guys.
Thanks, Patrick.